Let's look at the big story breaking this afternoon. Ukraine firing British Storm Shadow missiles reportedly into Russia for the first time. Russian channels say 12 long-range missiles were fired into Kursk, a region that's partially held by Ukrainian forces. The Ministry of Defense is not commenting on these reports at this point. Yesterday, the PM evaded questions on the subject, but he reinforced his commitment to Ukraine.
I'm not going to comment on operational details. The reason that I'm not going to comment is, I think, well understood, which is Putin is the winner if we do so, and it will undermine Ukraine, and I'm not prepared to do that.
So that's the Prime Minister speaking yesterday. Now, Tim Marshall joins us live on the line, the foreign policy expert, author of Prisoners of Geography. Welcome back to the programme, Tim.
Hello, John.
Tim, could you just tell us what we know about what's happened?
12 missiles is what the Russians said. I've seen a lot of footage which certainly suggests that that's about right. I've looked at what could be the target. It's a town called Marino in Kursk, and in that region there is a Russian command and control center that's underground. And you would use something like a Storm Shadow if you had it, because they have this delayed fuse that once the actual missile has buried itself to the target, the delayed fuse then explodes. And so if you've got something underground that's got concrete above it, that's the sort of thing you would use. So it all comes together. You mentioned what Mr. Starmer said yesterday, and I would add to that what John Healey, Defence Secretary, has said today. Ukraine's actions against Russia speak for themselves. And I think that's as close as a confirmation we're going to get. So it has happened. I think it was inevitable.
Yeah,
it was going to happen.
I mean, that talk from Keir Starmer yesterday about doubling down in support of Ukraine and giving it all the help that it needs. It only really made sense if this was coming. It only made sense as if there was already some sort of agreement with Joe Biden in the air that, you can go ahead and use the British Storm Shadow missiles, British-French Storm Shadow missiles, which need my okay.
Yep, and also agreement with the British. I mean, the British gave the Storm Shadow. I don't want to overstate this. A lot of people are saying massive game changer. Storm Shadow's already been used last year, but it was fired against Black Sea targets near Sebastopol and Russian targets. And that, of course, as far as the UK and everybody else in the world except Russia and a couple of countries is concerned, remains sovereign territory of Ukraine.
Yes.
The difference is that it has now gone across that border. But I would have thought that I'm utterly confident the Ukrainians will have liaised with the British about the target as well.
Yeah.
I mean, British satellites have been used to help Ukraine target all over the place. Storm Shadow has been used, Javelin has been used, etc., etc. But there are things within range of it. For example, Rostov-on-Don, that's a city of about 1 million people. Downing Street and the MOD are not going to sign off on something hitting something inside that city. They would sign off for something hitting a relatively remote underground command and control system.
Right. So absolutely, by all means, let us not overstate matters.
Yeah.
But to have these missiles fired clearly with British involvement, British permission into Russian sovereign territory, that does count as an escalation, as a message, as a statement and an act of commitment to the Ukrainian cause beyond what we've seen so far. I mean, Britain, of course, like America, is very top of the list, Russia's hate list, and that is where it is at the moment. But there will now surely be some kind of Russian response, even if it doesn't go quite so far as the sort of extreme talk of nuclear response.
I agree with you, John. I mean, it is a significant moment. It's just not this sort of massive game changer that some people say, but also, and I think this is important, that the Russians want to put out there into the Western publics as if it's some incredibly big red line that's gone across.
Yes.
For me, it's just in that long list of Javelins, Challenger tanks, fighter jets, Storm Shadows, and now another step has been taken. That I absolutely do accept, and I also accept that there has to be some sort of blowback from the Russians. The Americans, as you said in the news, and the Greeks have already closed their embassy. Yeah. They are probably expecting some sort of large barrage to hit Kyiv. There are many things that can be done, and the Russians are masters of the grey zone, what are known as grey zone activities.
Yes.
And I don't know if you noticed, but this week, a couple of undersea cables were cut in the Baltic Sea. And the finger is pointed either at China or now more probably Russia.
Yes.
There are things that the Russians can do and will do, but nuclear war or even things several degrees below that, no. The reason that Mr. Putin deliberately chose yesterday to confirm what had already been agreed about their nuclear posture. It was agreed in September, but he only inked it, he only signed off on it yesterday because of the ATACMS attack.
Yes.
They will come up with something else symbolic about this, but we have not just gone through a massive, massive Russian red line here. They just want us to think, or to our publics to think that we have.
Yes, but they will, though, accepting all of that, Russia, Putin, the Kremlin, they will want something conspicuous on their side to be done, which will be seen as they can at least present as a credible and appropriate response to the use of these British and American missiles. And you referred there to grey warfare, hybrid warfare. It's sometimes referred to the cutting of cables, that sort of thing. What's on that list of potential acts of hybrid warfare? I mean, we're talking cyber attacks as well as the above.
Yep, and they're pretty good at them, and so are the Russians. Both of those countries were ahead of the UK and to an extent even the Americans for years and years, and we were playing slight catch-up. Now, the British are actually now very good and very good at defensive from cyber attacks. GCHQ has really been putting in a lot of effort on that. But the Russians are world leaders at cyber. So yeah, I would add that to the list that you've mentioned. So cable cutting, cyber, and attacks on British interests elsewhere. I mean, they will react. But it is not, and I can see that you're trying to steer this middle ground, John, and I agree with you. This is a significant moment, but I just keep coming back to this point about not a red line.
Yeah.
Cyber warfare, grey zone, whatever label you put on it, they will try some form of response. And now the pressure, well, not the pressure, but the question goes to the French now. Because Scalp is exactly the same missile as Storm Shadow, but they've also given this to the Ukrainians. Are they now going to be used? And is France then put on Putin's naughty step?
Yeah.
And then the other question is about the German missiles, the Taurus missiles. Germany does not look like it wants to go as far as the Americans, the British, and the French have gone.
Right. Really, as always, Tim, really, really helpful to get your judgment on these things as they develop. So let's get the thoughts, first of all, then, of Francis Farrell of the Kyiv Independent. Hello to you, Francis.
Hello, John.
Francis, can you add any more to what we know went on here? Tim Marshall, who knows a thing or two, has been looking at some of the data and the evidence, suggesting this might have been an attack on an underground Russian military facility. What do you think?
So we don't have too many details yet about the strike, and both today's Storm Shadow strike and yesterday's strike with US-made ATACMS missiles have been only confirmed on the Ukrainian/Western side by anonymous sources only. But it is pretty, I think we can say with pretty high levels of confidence that it has taken place, considering that they coincide in the way that they do, and they coincide with reports, most importantly of all, that the White House ended the restrictions on using these missiles deep inside Russia. Now, of course, this comes after a long, long wait from the Ukrainian side and many threats from the Russian side saying that this would be, in fact, an attack by NATO itself. Yes. So we are waiting now to see what Russia's reaction will be, having made those threats.
Yes. Now, if we take it, Francis, the reports are fully accurate. What significance will be attached to this by the leadership of Ukraine in Kyiv and by the people of Ukraine?
So there's a battlefield dynamic, but as you rightly mentioned, I think the first and foremost is a political and symbolic dynamic. to the lifting of these restrictions, and especially the beginning of such strikes. We know that, again, Ukraine has been asking for this for a long time, and the reluctance to lift these restrictions, and especially if we talk about Storm Shadow specifically, the fact that they really felt their need to tie their policy to Washington, it was taken as weakness, and it was taken in Ukraine, I mean, as weakness that has come at a great cost, because while Ukraine has been fighting with their hands tied behind their back, Russia has come across the border to Kharkiv in March, and then Ukraine went across the border into Kursk Oblast, but at no time during either of those operations was there the ability to actually use these weapons as they normally should against high-value targets deep behind Russian lines. And because it took so long, of course, now Russia has adapted, and the battlefield difference will be one thing, but it is crucial to show that these Western countries have stood up to Russia's threats, to Russia's so-called red lines, and now the ball is in their court to respond.
Right. And of course, Washington's thinking now will be very different to the thinking of Washington in January, when Donald Trump becomes the president of the United States. And to the view seems to be running quite strongly out there that the use of these missiles, the supply of anti-personnel mines to the Ukrainian military, it is about trying to give Ukraine a more favorable position and the battle map of these areas ahead of talks with Putin. How far is that assumption shared in Kyiv by the leadership and by the people of the country?
So, of course, for a long time as the war went on, it's true that the idea of just negotiations for negotiation's sake, a ceasefire for ceasefire's sake, was a bad idea with Russia, simply for the reason that there's absolutely no guarantee that they'll be negotiating in good faith, and something they sign on a piece of paper just doesn't matter to them. They'll be thinking about when to invade again, because they officially, according to them, annexed 4 regions of Ukraine, and the whole invasion started with a failed attempt to decapitate independent Ukraine in the first place. On the other hand, I think Zelensky and slowly the people of Ukraine, they see the writing on the wall. They see that Trump does not feel very strongly about these values and the importance of a complete, just victory for Ukraine. And meanwhile, the battlefield is really taking a turn against the Ukrainians, with Russians making faster gains every month over summer and autumn. So that is why Kiev has decided to show that they're ready for negotiations, but to really get this point across, that it needs to be peace through strength. And in the meantime, absolutely, the outgoing Biden administration should and is looked like will do as much as it can to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position.
It's really interesting thoughts, Francis. Thank you. Francis Farrell there from the Kyiv Independent. And we can get now a view of Alexander Cara, who is a director at the Center for Defense Strategies in Ukraine, former advisor to the Minister of Defense in 2020. Alexander, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Alexander, your judgment as a strategic and defense policy thinker, is it your view now that Ukraine, that the game plan, as it were, is to prepare for talks next year with Putin? It is about getting into the strongest position now to do that.
Well, first of all, we do not believe in talks with Russia. We had Minsk Accords, and the Russians violated it several times, and then they launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Yes.
And even with regards to other countries and other issues, like the Chechen War of 1990s was concluded with the agreement, and then Putin himself violated those agreements and conquered this autonomous republic of the Russian Federation. So we do not believe in diplomacy with Russia.
Yeah.
And we don't believe that there is a ground for compromise. The Russians want to have these territories that they illegally occupied and annexed to be the Russians' ones. And on top of that, they want to limit our sovereignty, and they want to disarm our armed forces and to deny Ukrainian right to be a member of NATO. So I don't understand where we can find a compromise with Russia.
Okay, so that is as clear as can be from your position. You do not want to see peace talks. You don't believe you can trust Russia for a moment to come to a deal and stick to it if a deal is stuck. How far do you believe, and Gage, how far do you believe that is the view at the top of the Ukrainian government, the view of Volodymyr Zelensky? I can hear him saying all the things that you're saying, but is there something of a dawning realization that Donald Trump is going to make anything but talks practically impossible?
Our president just addressed the parliament, and he has been talking about the possible realistic resolution. And certainly he said that we are not going to give up on our territories.
Yeah.
I understand that Mr. Trump may try to impose these peace talks on Ukraine. He may cut supplies of weapons and other assistance to Ukraine, and we will be in dire straits here. But fortunately, we've seen positive developments on the European side.
Yes.
5 ministers of defense are gathering now. They are talking about how they are going to fill the gap if the Americans decide to cut the supplies. And the most important, there is a completely different view of the world from Russia and from the United States. And their values and their interests are colliding. And that's why I don't see compromise on the part of Mr. Trump. This war is not about territory of Ukraine. It's not about eliminating Ukrainian nation and subjugating Ukrainians to Russia. It's about the European security architecture and new role of Russia on the global stage. I don't think that Europeans would be happy with such a, let's say, talks that would envisage a new architecture in Europe that Russia would threaten the European countries. Neither Trump would be happy be seen as a sort of a weak leader that is undermining the unity of the West and putting in the weaker position his European alliance, even though he's critical. And he has been doing it for the right reason. He was criticizing European countries for not paying enough for defense. It was back in 2016, 17. Now 2/3 of the NATO countries are paying 2% of their GDP to defense, and some of countries like Poland are paying even more, 4.5%, and they're going to increase those expenditures. So I don't think that there is beyond Ukraine there are more problematic issues to sort it out. And finally, just like in 2021, when the Russians for the first time threatened to invade Ukraine in the full scale, they demanded from the United States to pack their belongings and to get out of the European continent, including their nukes, and to get these Central and Eastern European countries out of NATO. I don't think it's acceptable neither for the United States nor for the Europeans.
It's really good to get your thoughts this afternoon. So a call and a hope for more solidarity, more support from your European allies, and a clear message of defiance to Vladimir Putin. Alexander Cara there from Ukraine's Center for Defense Strategies.